Hey Scarface fans, welcome to another Machiavellian Monday here on Bully Whispers, and today we will be taking a look at Tony Montana. Now, Tony provides a decent example of someone who is thought to be very Machiavellian, but in reality is not. Machiavellianism is much more specific than just a single-minded, ruthless pursuit of the top. The Prince is essentially a how-to-rule manual for current or aspiring leaders, detailing the most effective ways to deal with specific situations and different types of people based on Machiavelli's historical observations. Now, this is not to say that he didn't possess any characteristics that would fall into that category. In fact, what is possibly his most defining characteristic would certainly qualify. Machiavelli asserts that, with a few exceptions, it is better to be bold than cautious. For good fortune is like a woman, a lover of men with the audacity to command her, and Tony Montana is certainly that. But here's the thing. Machiavelli qualifies his statement on boldness so that it's not just a blanket statement, and his comparing of a good fortune to a woman is especially funny when evaluating Tony Montana specifically because of how his relationship with the two main women in his life played out. Although they still play out in a way referenced in The Prince, but we will circle back to that later. Tony's boldness can be seen from the very beginning and manifests itself into many Machiavellian actions. Aside from his cocky disposition during the interrogation, which is just his personality, or even his assassination of Rebenga, which could be viewed as an act of vengeance just as much as an act of boldness, his meeting with Omar to discuss his first real money-making endeavor that could be ongoing shows us exactly how bold he is.
What's with his dishwasher, Chico? Don't you think we could have got some other space cadet to hit Rebenga cheaper, dude? $50.
Then why didn't you, man? Don't be calling me no fucking dishwasher. I'll kick your fucking monkey ass all over the fucking...
You're not gonna do that.
Now, realistically, Tony is in no position to be acting in this manner. He doesn't really know anyone, and no one really knows him. But his boldness got him upgraded to a coke deal where he could make much more money.
Okay. All right, big man. You want to make some big bucks. Let's see how tough you are. You know something about cocaine?
Did you get in there or what?
There's a bunch of Colombians coming in Friday. New guys. They say they got 2 keys for us for openers. Pure coke, Hotel Miami Beach. I want you to go over there. And if it's what they say it is, you pay them and bring it back. You do that, you got $5,000.
That deal turned out to be a setup, but in the context of this video, that's irrelevant. What is relevant is that his brazenness put him in a position where he had both the money and the coke. And he didn't stop there. He continued to push his way through what would have otherwise been closed doors and insisted on bypassing Omar and delivering them straight to Frank himself.
You still got the money?
Yeah. And I got the yayo.
You got the Yale?
Yeah, right.
Bring it here.
Fuck you. I ain't taking it to Lopez myself. Yeah. Now you, me.
Frank's biggest problem was that he didn't follow his own advice.
Lesson number 1. Don't underestimate the other guy's greed.
And according to Machiavelli, people whose motive is ambition can never completely be trusted. He falsely assumed he could get Tony on his side, but Tony had no desire to be under anyone, and Frank's big mistake became Tony's big break. He sent him with Omar to meet Sosa. So, at this point, through sheer force of will, Tony has managed to make it to Bolivia to meet a major producer face to face. And it is at this point that we see him employ, consciously or not, 2 major Machiavellian strategies. First, a prince is respected when he is either a true friend or a downright enemy. In this instance, even before it was revealed that Omar was a snitch, Tony made no pretense about his feelings towards Omar, undermining him constantly and controlling the flow of the conversation. This is a bluntness that Sosa recognized and respected.
I have to hand it to you, Mr. Sosa. You got everything a man could want.
I like you, Tony. There is no lying in you.
Second, according to Machiavelli, a true prince is never idle and even in times of peace will be constantly seeking to increase resources. This aspect of Tony is especially obvious with Omar there as a contrast. Even if Omar hadn't been a snitch, you can really see the difference when looking at how he was clearly trying to take a diplomatic role while Tony was rallying hard to increase resources. Tony had the mentality of a prince, Omar did not. This brings us to Tony's killing of Frank Lopez and his rise to the top of the Miami scene. It's very easy here to say that the failed assassination attempt prompted Tony's move, but I think it's just accelerated what was already inevitable. Tony may have claimed he was loyal to Frank, and he probably thought he was, but he had his eyes on Frank's woman and business from day one. He wanted more.
Me, I want what's coming to me.
Oh, well, what's coming to you, Tony?
The world, Chico. And everything in it.
Interesting side note, Frank's previous helper, Ernie, who was left alive...
What about Ernie?
You want a job, Ernie?
ends up being a great example of two of the principles described in The Prince. First, old loyalties are quickly stripped when people are treated well, and second, a prince will often find more fidelity with those who were initially distrusted than with those who were initially trusted. And Ernie was there till the very end. Either way, that conflict was inevitable, and ended in the only way it could have. As Machiavelli expresses, there are only two ways of contesting, by law or by force, and since the law often fails, force is resorted to. Now, obviously contesting through law isn't a possibility in his business, so Tony resorted to violence. But here's the thing. Coming from Cuba, he would have had no exposure to anything other than force, as the law was completely corrupt, and may have played a large part in his fearsome persona. In terms of Machiavellian evaluation, this actually lines up well with one of the most famous parts of The Prince, but it is also where we begin to see Tony as less a successful practitioner of Machiavellian strategy, and more as an example of what happens to a prince if they disregard his advice. In Chapter 17, Machiavelli ponders whether it is better to be loved or feared, and after evaluating things such as self-interest, etc., he concludes that it is best to be both, but if you have to choose, it's better to be feared. Now, while there are several different branches of thought he goes out on, the essence of his point is that it is better to be feared because you can't make people love you, but you can make them fear you. And this is where Elvira and Gina pop back into the evaluation. Elvira provides a perfect example of the first part of that sentiment. You can't make people love you.
I'm leaving you.
And Gina provides a perfect example of what happens if you take the second part too far. While he says it's better to be feared, Sonny expresses the other part of that in A Bronx Tale.
It's fear that keeps them loyal to me. But the trick is not to be hated.
And with Gina, he pushed it to the point where he was hated, and he faced a revolt. So what was it about Tony that caused these mistakes, as well as the ones that brought about his downfall? Machiavelli describes three types of intellect. The first, which is the best, is one which comprehends on its own. The second understands what others have understood, and the third, which is incapable of understanding either on its own or through showing of others. Now, the movie Scarface doesn't really have any characters that fall into that third category, but where does Tony fall? He shows no reason to be placed in the first category. He didn't really have to create or design anything. He simply met the right people and stepped into an already established enterprise. Now, to be fair, the fact that he could do that proves that he is above the third category and into the second, but even still, he would fall into the lower end of that group. His failure to understand circumstances is what holds him back and is best exemplified in this clip.
We're gonna war.
Really, Tony? You're gonna go to war with the South American drug lord? Now, it can be argued that he was coked out of his mind and that's what prompted that statement. And while he may have been on a bit of a bender, that statement was consistent with his personality aside from that. I don't doubt that he would actually think he could take Sosa on, despite the fact that he had no connections in Bolivia other than Sosa, and as far as we know, no connections with any other cartels. Now, to be fair, Tony didn't declare war on Sosa. Sosa declared it on Tony. So let's examine the event that led to it from a Machiavellian standpoint. This is where the potential for a cutthroat mentality is really shown in its relation to Scarface. While his unwillingness to kill family is really Tony's only redeeming quality by the end of the movie, it was very un-Machiavellian. According to the Prince, ignoring what is done for what should be done will bring about your ruin faster than your preservation, and that you must act in according with the times. While it may have been taboo to target families in Italian organized crime, when it came to the cocaine trade at that time, families were fair game. So as admirable as his moral stance may have been, if he had acted in a Machiavellian way, that whole crisis would have been avoided since no other tensions were really present. Ultimately, Tony Montana ended up becoming a great example of how a prince can be seen as happy today and ruined tomorrow if relying primarily on good fortune, which he was. despite his belief that it was all because of him. He was unaware of the hand fortune played in his rise, perhaps because he was so unfortunate early in his life, but either way, he didn't recognize that there were thousands of triggermen with the backbone to do what he did. The only real difference is that he was lucky enough to know Manny, who knew someone to get him through, and was beyond lucky enough to be personally introduced to Sosa very quickly. Take those away, and he would have been just another ballsy guy trying to make it in the drug business. Nobody particularly noteworthy or Machiavellian, as pretty much anything Machiavellian about him is a byproduct of his boldness. Well, thanks for watching another episode here on Bully Whispers. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And if there's anything you'd see me like covered, let me know. As always, see you at the next score.